So struggle is real and struggle is relative. But is it? And I'll come back to that thought as we close it up today. But I'd like to wish you all a happy, intentional new year and welcome you to the first episode of the 2024 season of the No Bad Karma podcast, where I'm going to talk about living and loving intentionally. More intentionally than you are now, I hope. And it's where I'm trying to share with you what I've learned from my personal bad choices and the struggle I've had to go through, growth in real time, because I want other people to live their life more intentionally, not make the mistakes I made, and hopefully find some wisdom in my experience that they can use to embrace and make their life more meaningful. So, a few housekeeping notes for today. First of all, I just want to say thank you to anybody who found me on Apple Podcasts, iHeart especially, among others. I have listeners from so many platforms now and from outside the U.S., and I really appreciate that. So I really want to thank you for that. And second housekeeping note, I'm podcasting today from a new location. So if you're watching the video, you don't see the normal stuff behind me. My new location is between the shores of the Allegheny and State Route 28, damn near the shadows of the Highland Park Bridge, in a little borough, pretty awesome little borough called Sharpsburg in the Steel City of Pittsburgh. And the relevance, that has a relevance in today's theme, which is I want to talk a little bit about just what it means to live and love intentionally. But the third housekeeping note is today's date. Today's February 12th. It's the first episode of the season, though I'm starting earlier than I did last year. But I've been working on this episode since January 8th and was going to record it then. But the relevance of today is, in addition to the Chiefs winning the Super Bowl again yesterday, this past weekend, I celebrated 5 years of not drinking. And if you've listened to the podcast, you know, I believe to this day that that's the root of my problems. So I'm going to be recording a separate message about that, but maybe posting on a personal channel. But Daddy is an Alcoholic is a good old episode to go back to if you want to hear more about that. But the other thing with it being February 12th here, and again, this being the first episode of the new year, I really thought it was a good opportunity to talk about four things today, really. New Year's and its relevance in being intentional or not with setting goals. Even though we're a month into the year, there's a couple little facts I wanted to throw out there. And then secondly, really just what it means to be intentional. The last episode, I called it rebranding and talked about, you know, a little bit about changing the direction of your life. And I want to talk a little bit about what it means to live intentionally and love intentionally from my perspective. I'll briefly recap my story of intentionality and how it's relevant now, like today, and tell you why New Year's doesn't matter. If I seem a little tired at points, that's because I've been out Instacarting, and I'll talk about what that has to do with my story of intentionality. So let's get into it. So as I said, it's first episode of the new year, and I started this episode on Monday, January 8th. I took the first week of the year off, which isn't even a full week. January 8th starts the first full week of the year. And I pulled up some facts when I started putting this together. And 25% of everybody that set a New Year's resolution gives up by the end of the first week. And then another 2/3 of the people that have set a resolution give up by the end of the year. That's 90% if you do the math. So that means only 1 out of 10 people actually stick to their resolution until the end of the year. So that's not very intentional. And the truth is, some people don't care, but most people, I think, are setting them and do care. But I think a lot of it has to do with this big buildup we have to it, right? We take this man-made day, the Gregorian calendar that has December 31st as the end of the year, and we use it to measure our progress or lack of progress in life. And then we use that mark, to set goals to take the next step. Now, and then we do it again at the end of the year. We measure ourselves again, and we always hope we don't feel too bad, right? But so there's good in that it makes everybody aware of some conscientious goal setting, but there's such a buildup there, and I debated whether I wanted to talk about the mental health aspects and the depression and some of the statistics around that, because they're all over the place if you do the research on what to believe. But so many people just get down about not meeting their goals at the end of the year, and I did too this past year. And that's why, because of what I've been through, it's always important for me to reach out to those feeling something. But I don't want my message should be limited to those, and I'll mention that here again at the end too. But let's just build on what I was talking about in terms of rebranding your life and trying to move it forward, because I really wanted to talk about what it means to be intentional, and I break it down into two broad categories. I talk about living intentionally and loving intentionally. And if we want to talk about living intentionally, it's not just being intentional with your actions. Your intentional actions can be negative. So what it isn't is being malicious. It isn't doing things that hurt others. It isn't doing what I did, and that's cheating on your partner or your spouse. But what it really is being aware of the ripple effects that you cause. And I talked about that again in the last episode. That's what I'm calling karma. It's the awareness that your actions have some result. Every what's the law of physics? Every force has an equal and opposite force, right? That force is going to get dispersed into something else, at least. And that's what happens. We cause these ripple effects in life. But see, the thing is once you're aware of that, and this again is really what living intentionally is about. And we can talk about each of these points in a separate episode. And this is really the overview episode, if anything, right? So you start thinking about that ripple effect that you're causing with your actions. And suddenly, it starts with the big things. You're like, oh, if I take this job, it's going to impact my life this way. If I date this person, it's going to impact my life this way. Well, that goes into loving too. But, if I live here, it's going to affect my life this way. So, it certainly starts with the big things, but suddenly you're going to be thinking of the minutia of your day, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Well, don't let it get to you too much, but you start thinking of every decision you're making, and you're like, well, if your friend calls you up and says, let's go get a coffee, and you don't want to go, suddenly you're like, well, I don't want to go get a coffee because, I have stuff I want to do here. I don't want to spend time with that friend. If I go and do that, it's going to have a ripple effect on my day, my mental well-being, if it's somebody I don't like spending time with. So and one of the, honestly, I found myself being honest with people, and to a level I never had before. And, you always have to be tactful, but I can't even bring myself to tell a white lie. If somebody asks me to do something and I don't want to, or I don't want to give my time, and I think about the ripple effect it's going to cause on me, not just others, I say no. And it's unfortunate, but if you let yourself get tied into things you don't want to do all the time, but it's where you have to take ownership of it and realize that you're doing yourself a favor and ultimately other people a favor by just being honest. So if you want to sum up living intentionally in a much easier fashion, it's really about just pursuing your joy and pursuing the things that make you happy without hurting others. And it's hard because sometimes you hurt people and you don't mean to, but it's really about pursuing your joy. And that goes into everything. It's your joy in how you want to live. It's your joy in your job. It's the joy you have in the car you get in every day. It's the joy you want to have in your bank account, right? And if you start pursuing those things and you're aware that you're not going to hurt others or take advantage of others in the process, all the good ripples are going to come back to you. I said earlier when I was talking about living intentionally, I mentioned a comment about, dating the people you intend. And that's really part of loving intentionally, because loving intentionally is not just about the significant other in your life. It's not just your dating efforts. It's not just your partner. Loving intentionally goes back to one of the mantras I've talked about: humanity, others, yourselves. But it doesn't matter where you want to start. Treat it as a triangle. Start with yourself. And that's a really good place to start in this discussion, because if you're loving intentionally, what do you want your relationships to be? And those relationships, again, just aren't your romantic relationships. They're loving intentionally. Part of that's loving yourself. Are you taking care of your body? Are you feeling the way you want? Are you smoking too much like me? And then it goes into others. And a good place to always start with the others is, again, your partner is a big part of it, and or your spouse, right? It's your kids, it's your parents, it's your siblings, it's all these other people in your life. So, and then I always talk about humanity. And loving intentionally applies to that too. That's just, pay it forward once in a while, right? Give $1 to that person on the corner once in a while. And earlier I mentioned, struggle is real, and asked if struggle is relative. Well, here's the thing. Everybody out there is experiencing a struggle of some type. It doesn't matter if it's the same as yours. It doesn't matter if it's worse or better than yours. It's just being aware of it. So again, when I'm talking about loving intentionally, I'm talking about building and fostering those relationships with yourself, and then the other people in your life, and then just the strangers you encounter too, as appropriate to the situation. Because at the end of the day, it's what I said earlier. It's about pursuing your joy. So if you're talking about loving intentionally and pursuing your joy, and we talk about yourself, what makes you happy? What do you want to do with your life? That goes into living intentionally. What type of people do you want to be around? Your friends. That goes into the others and how you're going to start treating them. And I do want to talk about focusing on your partners and dating for a minute, because if you're talking about loving intentionally, and I said in the last episode about this poster over the office on my desk, you know, so much of your happiness comes from the person that you're going to spend your life with. And that brings us to the first point. You can be out there dating and not dating for a relationship because maybe you don't know what you want. Maybe you are dating different types of guys or girls, etc. That's fine. It's still about being intentional with those efforts. You know, don't get involved with somebody who, you know, wants a relationship if you don't. That's just going to cause a ripple effect. You know, or you'll end up on a late night episode of Dateline. But you know, don't you have to be in, you know, your intentions and communicating your intentions and being pure about your intentions are what it's about. Which brings me to one of the housekeeping points I had at the beginning of this episode. You know, why I'm broadcasting from a new location, because I've maintained a long distance relationship with my partner, and I'm spending some time here. So I'm loving intentionally. I'm working on building my relationship because it's best built on if we're spending time together. I wanted to briefly touch on my story of intentionality and then tie it back to the New Year's theme for a minute here. So I'm not going to repeat the whole story again. That's why the previous episodes exist. But, you know, and even though I didn't start the podcast this way, I get to the point where I talk about how my story of intentionality really started when I quit drinking, which coincidentally was when my 3-year affair, 2 weeks before my 3 affair ended. And what I realized is when I drank, I made reactive choices. I reacted to what was going on around me and made choices that maybe normally I wouldn't make. And that's because, again, my drinking resulted in me avoiding difficult decisions. And the longer you avoid them, the bigger hole you dig yourself in. But here's how it ties to intentionality. I just wasn't being intentional, right? There were things I wanted to do that I didn't do because I was reacting. And then I quit drinking. And after I quit drinking, and that's when I started being proactive, right? So that was 5 years ago. 5 years ago now, 2019. That's when I started being proactive. And by the end of 2019, yes, I was starting to think clearly. I wanted to get stable income, so I wanted to adjust my business. So I took a consulting sabbatical, right? I set out with the plan, but the plan didn't really come together for me until April 2001, when I was at a really down moment. And I thought, and I've talked about this in a previous episode, I thought, how do I want to live my life? I don't want to live on the wheel of life. And that's the episode, right? So I want to be sure I live intentionally. Yes, I want to be a responsible citizen. Yes, I want to pay my bills. Yes, I want to do all this. But what's the point of doing it if you're not happy? And one of the reasons was for me was because I had gone a year without dating much. I knew the type of person I wanted to date. I wanted to date for a partner, and I just thought anything else is a waste of time and money. So now that's almost 3 years ago now from where we are today. But so like I said, that was around April 2021. And then it took a year, but the plan kind of came together, right? So it was April 2022. I meet somebody who I think's the one. My choice to be Sable got extended, and I thought that was going to be good for me, right? And then all of a sudden, like within 30 days, it all fell apart. But it also fell apart because it was partly my fault. That's the truth. It was partly my fault on the relationship side. My plan got disrupted, and I only believe in one plan, and I wasn't ready for another play. And it took a long time to find someone, and I found him, and I blew it quickly, and it all fell apart. But I was in a pretty good place, all in all, about it. I was more upset about the relationship than I was getting my financial stability life shook up and adjusting my plans. But it was workable. I had a play for that. So I work hard at it again. It takes damn near another year. Right? So now we're getting up to like spring 2023. So about a year ago, right? And I talked about how I made reactive choices when I drank, and I make proactive choices now that I don't drink. And I talk about being intentional and not creating ripples, right? So I have a plan, and I'm approached by the guy who kind of shook my plan before to go with him on a new plan, a plan that supported my plan. So I chose that. I made a proactive decision and chose that, even though I was a little nervous about it, even though I think I wanted to trust my gut, and maybe I didn't, because I felt it was a guy I could trust, right? So, but spring 2023 is coming around, and I don't know that yet. But I'm living intentionally because I'm moving on with my plan for life. And I'm still trying for my plan for love. And I get out there and I start dating because I took a break from him when my world got shook up a year earlier, a little bit of a break. And I was just getting proactive again because it was important to me to be loving intentionally. I'm dating for a relationship. I'm dating for a long-term partner when my life was stable, when I'm living intentionally, right? I knew I'd be in the best spot I could be in when dating for a partner. So what happens? I meet her. I meet the one. And then I get screwed in life. The deal I had professionally falls through. My stability is ripped out from underneath my feet. That's crushing. That's crushing when you're trying to live intentionally and when you're trying to date for a relationship, for a long-term relationship, for stability, for a true partnership. So, what did I do? I had a play, but I wasn't ready to call it. And it's taken me months and months and months of work to get to where I wanted to be, had things work the way I expected them to be. And I've really had to learn to love intentionally and understand a partnership more than ever, and to work at a positive relationship. And as a result, I'm out there Instacarting to make ends meet until I can get back on my feet, which I'm going to talk about that in an episode where I talk about all that work in general. So at the end of the day, that's why New Year's doesn't matter, because I was in a dark place at New Year's time, and I had to talk to my partner about that, and that was a little upsetting to her. And if you're ever upset and in a dark place, you need to call someone and get help. There's no shame in that, or talk to someone, which is what I was really trying to do with my partner, even though it didn't really come across that way, because I was shook for a minute on how to pursue my joy. I didn't meet the deadlines I wanted. I let that date get to me. But here's the thing. It's not a date. It's a process. It's a process you do every day. It's a process where you give your choices a purpose bigger than yourself. But those are also choices for yourself. That's how you keep perspective on humanity, others, and yourself, by realizing that there's karma in the world, and realizing that when you give your choices a purpose bigger than yourself, it does more good than harm, and always will. I'm going to end it with that, because struggle is real. It's real for everyone, and struggle is relative, but it's not. We all have the same basic human needs. And most of us out there have a need for love, whether we realize it or not. So living and loving intentionally is how you give your choices a purpose bigger than yourself. I'll see you soon.